I'm sitting with a patch of one of my favorite spring ephemeral wildflowers, and that's Pedicularis. So this species here is Pedicularis canadensis, and some common names that Pedicularis is often known by include lousewort or wood betony. But wood betony can be a little bit confusing because there is another plant in the Stachys genus that's also called wood betony, so I prefer Pedicularis. So Pedicularis is one of those herbs that people go completely out of their way for, myself included. And that's just because this plant has a tendency to really make you fall in love with it. So, for example, I'm sitting in this beautiful patch out here of Pedicularis that I found a couple years ago, but in order to get here, I have to cross a stream 12 times. But it's so worth it because this is just such a precious plant and a precious medicine. So Pedicularis is a spring ephemeral. So an ephemeral is a plant that has its entire above ground life cycle between the time when the earth begins to warm in early spring and when the canopy of trees finally and completely leaves out. So it's really a short period of time that these spring ephemeral flowers are out. So, for example, I first saw this plant leafing out about 3 weeks ago, and at that point the leaves are really small and almost purple colored. Some people might even say chartreuse, depending on the species and what they're looking at. And at that point it looks very fern-like, and that's actually a good ID point. So if you take a look at the leaf now, it still looks very much like a fern. And it can be confused with a fern sometimes, but once it's in flower, you definitely know you have Pedicularis because there's really not much else that's growing in the woods that looks like this. So some great ID points are to really see its beautiful whorl of bilabiate flowers here, and they'll come in a lot of different colors. So again, this is Pedicularis canadensis, but there's up to 600 different species of Pedicularis in the world. So odds are you probably have a species growing somewhere in woods near you. So in Western herbalism, Pedicularis is considered one of our favorite skeletal muscle relaxants. So you might want to think of Pedicularis if you're looking at upper or lower back pain. It can be really helpful if you're someone who experiences a lot of skeletal muscle pain when you're sitting for a long period of time. So it can be taken prophylactically, for example, before you get on a really long transcontinental air flight. So I love it for all of those purposes. I also use it when there's a lot of teeth grinding at night because of tightness in the jaw, so to really help relax those jaw muscles. And it can also be a great muscle relaxant for smooth muscles as well. So just a little review, skeletal muscles are the muscles that we know to move and can move voluntarily, and smooth muscles are the muscles that we move involuntarily. So for example, the muscles in our gut and the muscles in our uterus. So this is a plant that I will definitely use for cramping, for menstrual cramps, and can be really effective in that manner. In terms of its skeletal muscle relaxing properties and smooth muscle as well, it really works for some people and other people not. Just kind of the same with all plants, right? We have an affinity with some and not with others, but when it works, it tends to really work. So one of the most beautiful indications for this plant is to help people who've experienced sexual trauma relax into intimacy. And this is really profound because anytime we experience trauma, there's an aspect of that. Anytime we re-enter a situation that might seem at all similar, there's a tightness and there's a tension that happens. It can be really difficult to get back into a space where you feel comfortable with sexuality, where you feel comfortable with intimacy. So Pedicularis can be a really valuable companion for those who are really looking to relax into intimacy. And one of my favorite pairings for that is to actually pair Pedicularis with red or orange calcite, which are two stones, if you're into stone medicine, that can really help us to sort of like regain our sexual confidence and really feel at home and safe again in sexual relationship. So Pedicularis, again, works as a muscle relaxant, but it's also a nervine, so it actually helps relax our nervous system. And some materia medicas also say that it's a hypnotic, meaning it helps us to sleep. And I find this to be true, but really just in the way that it helps us to relax. It really helps us to let go and feel peaceful in this moment. And those are some really great qualities to help one sleep. Now, energetically, I really love thinking about this plant as, yes, very relaxing and very peaceful, but also kind of having this zestiness to it, this wildness that is indicative to me of freedom. So if you just like take a look at this plant, it has some serious personality. And so again, coming back to this idea of freedom, anytime someone is experiencing chronic pain, there's a tendency to feel very cramped by that experience, to feel like you are hemmed in on all sides by pain and that there's not very much freedom in your life. So there is something energetically about this flower that I find can really help us to reconnect into that space of feeling free, that space of feeling like I can still grow, there's still options, I can stretch out. And I think that's really, really important when we're dealing with any kind of chronic condition, but especially pain, to realize that there are still areas to grow into and that there is freedom within that experience. So when I harvest Pedicularis, I will take just the flowering tops of the plant. And I always practice good harvesting ethics, especially with Pedicularis. Now, Pedicularis isn't super rare, but it's not that common. So I will only take about 1/10 of all the flowers I see, if that. So you can dry Pedicularis and have it in a tea. It's also traditionally been used as a smoking herb. So the best way to do that, again, is just to dry the flower head. And a lot of people say that when dried, it really looks like cannabis buds. So again, long history of usage as a smokable, and when you do smoke it, it does have that nervine effect, like very relaxing and somewhat sedating. Some people say if they've sort of overdosed on it that they'll get a little spacey and out of it, which might remind you of another herb. But it really is a beautiful smoking herb to use in any kind of ceremony or just your own relaxation ritual. Now, if you're going to tincture it, and you do weight to volume tincture, I will tincture it at 1 to 2, 95%. If you don't use weight to volume, that's totally fine. This is a really easy plant to do a folk tincture with. So you basically will just take the fresh flower heads and chop them up and cover them with alcohol. And vodka is a really great alcohol to use for that. And it's really that simple. So the one thing to keep in mind when you're harvesting Pedicularis is to make sure it's not growing near any plants that have toxic roots. So Pedicularis is symbiotic, or some would say parasitic, and it can tap into the roots of other plants for nutrients, and therefore there's sort of this exchange highway going on between these two plants. So you just want to make sure that it's not growing in amongst a patch of a plant that has a highly poisonous root, right? So you probably don't want to be harvesting it in amongst water hemlock, for example. So this is a really good time to get out your ID books and just be familiar with whatever plants it's growing around. So this is Pedicularis, and I hope that it finds its way into your medicine making practices this spring.